What is jambalaya? It is way more than rice, sausage, and spices. This dish is a living memory of survival, Black ingenuity, and a cultural fusion that helped shape Louisiana and the American South. Even the name jambalaya possibly has African origins. So join us today while we discuss the history of jambalaya. I'm your host, Country Boy, and this is One Mic Black History. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. But without further ado, let's get started. Jambalaya isn't just a food classic. It is an entire legacy in a pot. It stretches its roots back to enslaved Africans, Spanish, French influences with Black cooks, and generations of family tables. Traditionally, it's made by tossing together meats like sausage, chicken, seafood with veggies, herbs, and spices, and everything goes into one big pot. But as food historian Adrian Miller puts it, African Americans took foods that no one else wanted and made them something delicious. So don't let the simple ingredients fool you. Jambalaya is incredibly versatile. It is whatever you have on hand, whether that's shrimp or crawfish, gator, duck, even wild boar. It's cheap, it's filling, and made to feed a crowd. And it shows up everywhere in Louisiana, from music festivals to tailgate parties to church dinners and backyard cookouts. Today, jambalaya is an icon in Louisiana, and every family has its own spin and its own story to go with it. But people often wonder, where does the name jambalaya come from? And like the dish itself, it is a tangle of multiple cultural origins. Most experts agree that there's really no right story to the name, but theories swirl around like a pot of jambalaya. One idea is that it comes from the French and West African words of jamon, which means ham, and ya, which means rice in some West African languages. Food historian Jessica B. Hayes says that Creole cooking is about blending what you have together. So jamon ya could have become jambalaya, which is a name that reflects its mixed roots. Another theory points to the south of France, where the word jambalaya means mismatched or mixed, and that fits too, since jambalaya is all about mixing together what you have. Others think the name comes from Spanish influences of jamon, which means ham, and patella, which is a Spanish dish of rice, saffron, chicken, seafood cooked together in a large, shallow pan. But food historian Michael Twitty puts it best, and food tells a story, and that couldn't be more clear when it comes to jambalaya. Even its name is a mix of French, African, Spanish, and Native influences, and its historical origins, while a bit more clear, are exactly the same. So let's take it way back to where it all began, with the rice, which is the heart of jambalaya. Long before the tragedy of the transatlantic slave trade, Black men and women in West Africa were already growing rice. In places like Senegal and Gambia and parts of Mali, farming rice was a way of life. Families passed down irrigation tricks, seed-saving techniques, and harvesting practices. These farmers weren't just feeding themselves, they were supporting entire kingdoms in an area that historians would later call the Rice Coast. When travelers visited these areas in the 1500s, they wrote home about the thriving rice fields, the bustling villages, and the one-pot meals they were cooking, simmering over an open flame. And this is where the story takes a tragic yet familiar turn. In the late 1600s, early 1700s, European slave traders kidnapped West Africans, specifically targeting some of those with deep rice-growing knowledge. There was no accident. Plantation owners in the American South knew exactly what they wanted. They openly bragged about importing export rice planters, people who could turn the swamplands into fields of gold. And this skill forever changed the landscape of the American South, especially in places like South Carolina. When ships docked in bustling ports of New Orleans in the early 1800s, cities' inhabitants reflect a blending of cultures: indigenous groups, French colonists, Spanish settlers, German immigrants, and Africans brought here in chains. New Orleans and surrounding parishes quickly transformed into a cultural intersection, a place of profound cultural exchange. And nowhere was this more alive than in the kitchen. French colonists contributed their signature Holy Trinity, which is onions, celery, and bell peppers. The Spanish brought together patella, which is a rice dish with saffron and meats, which early settlers in the Americas attempted to create. When these ingredients like saffron weren't available, the cooks adapted, switching things up and eventually making a rich brown roux instead. German immigrants shared their knowledge of sausage making, giving jambalaya its classic andouille sausage taste, and Native American neighbors introduced local rice, wild game, and fiery peppers. But at the heart of these kitchens were Black cooks. Okra was brought over from Africa and grew in plantation plots, and familiar herbs and spices and seasonings made their way into those pots. Black cooks were always adapting and reinventing. They borrowed, they blended, they reimagined recipes with whatever they had on hand, rooted in African techniques and flavors, and through their creativity, jambalaya was born. The exact origin of jambalaya still remains debated among food historians, but it's clear that the dish owes much of its unique cultural blend to New Orleans. Recipes for jambalaya were passed down via word of mouth, whispered in the kitchens, and shared by grandmothers and aunties. It wasn't until the late 19th century that the word jambalaya first appeared in print, but one of the earliest written recipes comes from Abby Fisher, an enslaved woman from Alabama who included her own version of jambalaya called Jambalaya in her 1881 cookbook, What Mrs. Abby Fisher Knows About Southern Cooking. After the end of enslavement, Black cooks took their knowledge into restaurants and hotels and catering businesses all over the South, shaping Southern cooking from behind the scenes into plain sight. For generations, food traditions like these anchored Black families and communities, connecting potlucks, funerals, fish fries, marches, or just weekend dinners. Jambalaya was there to celebrate, remember, and stay connected. Jambalaya, as we know it, would not exist without the resilience and artistry of Black cooks and the blending of cultures that defined Louisiana. During the Great Migration, Black families moved from Louisiana to cities like Chicago, Houston, and Oakland and took jambalaya with them. It ended up on Harlem dinner tables in the 1940s and at Oakland block parties in the 1960s, and it became a treasured taste of home and of history and evolving over time that never disappeared. But there is a slight distinction here because there is a difference between Creole and Cajun jambalaya. Creole jambalaya is classic New Orleans, especially in Black communities. You can spot it because of its rich red color. That is thanks to the tomatoes. It is a nod to the Spanish and West African roots. Black families made jambalaya their own by layering it deep of onions, peppers, and celery, and smoked meats and seafood, and always with tomatoes. When you head to the Louisiana countryside, you'll find what's known as Cajun jambalaya, which is a version that skips tomatoes. It creates a deep color by browning meat and caramelizing vegetables and has a more smoky, earthy taste. It is a hearty, rustic dish that shows off the creativity of rural cooking. Both routes help shape Louisiana's food. But for this episode, we're focusing on Creole jambalaya because it is at the heart of Black New Orleans, and this is the recipe that shows up on Black Sunday dinners. As historian Frederick Douglass Opie states, the foodways of enslaved Africans are a testimony of struggle and creativity. So today, jambalaya is truly one of the stars of Southern cooking. It is loved across New Orleans and beyond for its amazing flavor. And even though it's made from simple, affordable ingredients, every bite is a reminder of the creativity and the resourcefulness passed down through generations. Jambalaya is more than just a tasty comfort food. It is a symbol of resistance, holding up the story of the transatlantic slave trade and blending West African with Native and European food traditions. It represents the strength of Black communities who grew the dish from enslavement and after. Once again, jambalaya is more than a meal. It is a living celebration of history, culture, and an ever-changing spirit of the people who created it. So, as food historian Michael Twitty writes, everything we eat tells a story. So the next time you taste jambalaya, remember that you're eating history. You're tasting the skill and the memory and the heart of Black cooks whose stories bubble up from each pot. Thank you. I'm your host, Country Boy. This has been One Mic Black History, and this is the story of jambalaya. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. I also have a podcast. You can find my podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I'd like to thank all my financial contributors. Without you, none of this could be possible. I love you all.